why is it that in the case of Tesla and a lot of other stocks, they only announce earnings prior at the end of the trading day, not at the beginning of the trading day when retail investors can get a hold of it? This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Wanted to thank our Patreon supporters as well as our subscribers. If you like the show, please hit the like button on the lower left. We also wanted to note to you that we do have trading advice, charts, etc. that are part of our Patreon working relationship that you might find useful on a monthly basis. So there are a number of things that are going to go on today with investing, trading Tesla that we wanted to address that I think will add value to what you're doing today. In particular, we wanted to first address pre and post-market trading. So one of the things you'll notice about Tesla and a bunch of other stocks, but Tesla in particular, is this phenomenon of in the pre-market, probably half the gains for the day will often disappear or happen in the aftermarket or in the pre-market. And so as a result, this process will often cut retail investors out of the potential to make money in those time bands. So one of the things we wanted to encourage you to consider is to spend some time with your brokerage firm today to make sure you have access to pre-market and aftermarket trading, because if you feel strongly about the numbers you see coming out of Tesla and you're starting to see positive results in terms of what the shares are doing, you now have the opportunity to go ahead and buy shares. Frankly, you could even sell them if you thought things were bad and going to get worse the next day. But the general idea is you're not just stuck during the 9 to 4 trading period that's available to retail investors. Now, during these periods, you can't trade options. The other piece of this is that you'll notice is that the after hours trading period is from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And in the morning, starting at 4 a.m., the market maker type firms are able to trade from 4 in the morning until 7 in the morning. And at 7 a.m., that's when retail investors will now have access to those markets. What we've noticed on Tesla is there's kind of a trend when there's big news that there'll be heavy trading in the evening. Today, we think the stock price will be up nicely. Then there'll be the 4 a.m. trading and you'll see sort of trading activity, but the heavy volume won't start until 7 a.m. all the way until the opening at 9:30. And so there's a lot of small and large things that tend to happen with this. One of them that we've noticed is there's often a dip. So the market will open at 9:30, and if in a pre-market it's been up strong, you'll often see kind of a little bit of a dip in that first 10 minutes because there's a lot of folks who made a lot of money overnight in after hours the night before or in pre-market the same day, and they want to preserve those gains by selling what they've made. And then you see sort of the regular folks that are buying into or selling into the market sort of in that 9:40 to 9:45 in the morning period. So I believe that if you have a decent sized portfolio, it's kind of critical that you make a point of having access to pre and post market, because from what I've been casually calculating, about half the gains that the stock tends to experience happens in pre or post market. And by your not having access to those, it really limits your ability to get your best returns. The next thing that we wanted to look at with this activity is you really have to be careful about margins. I frankly have gotten used to just saying, hey, buy that put or call at market, and I'm done with it. The problem though is when you mess with after hours, the gap can be huge between the bid ask. So you really have to sort of, I think, target the middle of the range or something you think is reasonable for price, because it's assumed that you're a sophisticated investor, and therefore you can understand what's going on with the bid ask. And I just want to warn you that a 20-point, 30-point gap between bid and ask is definitely on the possibility realm and should be considered in this space. So it's one of the sort of dangerous concerns. Another danger concern is, well, what if you choose to buy pre-market and all of a sudden the stock drops a lot after it opens? Another example of you don't get to see the open market activity. You're playing with the big guys, and in this space you could end up with either A, buying something and it's worth a lot more, or B, buying something that's worth a lot less at the open. So paying attention is definitely in order in this case. So I wanted to sort of run these by you because I think if you carefully take the time to understand this, it'll allow you to pick up a lot of extra cash in the process, because you're not missing out on all the gains in the after hours or in the pre-hours on a daily basis. And I think today's movement after hours should be rather significant. There are two other things that we want to dive into today that represent sort of interesting data points that one might be aware of that are going to be influential as we go down the road on Tesla in the future. One of them is something that's called implied volatility. So if you look at the option string of Tesla, you'll notice that the last row item is implied volatility. Well, one of the ways you can kind of see it in the number is on Friday of this past week, you could buy a call option at 800, which is 50 points out of the money, for about $1,100. In the last 2 years, that call option in that time frame has never been below $3,000, maybe $2,200, $2,500 or something like that for 1 week away options that close. But what this really shows is what we talked about, is the post S&P wet blanket that's gone on to the stock of Tesla, where it will move, and it could move significantly, but it tends to have those moves spread over longer times. So getting that immediate pop of 100 or 200 points is possible, but the trend has been that it's not been the case, i.e. the implied volatility is not as great as it was prior to Tesla's entry into the S&P, and it's really changed significantly how the trading works for this stock. So the question is, does this suggest the stock's going way higher or way lower? It doesn't. What it suggests is when you have a high implied volatility, implies that the stock price, at a very high number, the stock price should move up or down 100 points. And when there's a low implied volatility, in theory, the movement of the stock price will actually be fairly low, and therefore, that's sort of signaled by that low implied volatility. I'd have to say Tesla has a habit of surprising, meaning that in half to 3/4 of the cases where Tesla had a very high implied volatility, stock went nowhere. Example being its entry into the S&P and a relatively small move on the day of entry, but within 2 weeks there was a significant move, but most of the retail investors, somewhat including myself, missed out on that because nothing happened at the entry point for the S&P, and 200 million shares traded during that period. So it really shows that these are sort of guidelines, not definitive on what might occur, but it's great to have sort of little thumbnails on guidance in your process as you're investing and trading. The other thing, so one, implied volatility is low. Two, we're actually looking at what's happening. So we have implied volatility, we have pre and post market, are the type of issues that you want to be mindful of in terms of your planning on how to handle Tesla. The other sort of note that we're focused on is that I watched a show this morning with Dan Ives from Wedbush, and he was talking about the fact that, China in particular and Tesla's forecast for sales in particular are the two things that they're really going to try to tease out of the conversation with Elon and the finance team of Tesla at the end of the trading day. And the answer I'm coming up with is, you know, this is a no haps. This is not happening, meaning that he wants to know what the forecast is for Tesla. We have seen Tesla or Elon talk about, for example, last year, he gave a 500,000 vehicles sold target. And then the number we've had out there is a 50% increase this year is what the goal is. So I think Elon has learned the lesson of under promise, over deliver. And so we're kind of seeing that in terms of what he tends to do in terms of his comments. The thing is that that's a fairly secretive deal. A 50% gain, I guess, gets us into the 750,000 vehicle zone. And what everybody's looking for right now is, can Tesla get over 1 million vehicles this year with the help of greater numbers in China in particular? If the production facility was there from Fremont, I think it would be in the mix for helping that million. But from what we're seeing, Elon's done a great job of increasing the output of that factory. But there are a bunch of limitations that limit them to that 550, maybe 600,000 vehicles, but definitely 500 to 550 is a neighborhood in which they can operate coming out of Fremont. And then they tend not to break out the numbers in China. But as I shared with you in our previous show, the way we tend to tell what's happening in China in terms of demand, et cetera, is, are they loading vehicles onto ships to ship to Europe or not? And the trend has been of late that they didn't have enough cars to sell in Q1, and now in Q2 is when you're able to order cars / get deliveries. But from everything, the implied information we've been getting, Tesla's stuck in this, we don't have enough cars right now, and we're doing everything we can to meet domestic China demand. There are these sort of interesting data points that keep leaking off the back end, which I think is implied by what is your demand numbers or production numbers. And in particular, what I kept thinking about is, like, we just saw a number, there were 15,000 pre-orders for a Neo vehicle that was produced. There are certain numbers of orders from other manufacturers in the United States. And so Tesla should be terrified by these activities. And I guess they should be terrified, but the problem is, what if they're selling everything they can produce? And I really think this is what highlights the fact that the size of the marketplace continues to grow, and Tesla is leading that marketplace. So there can be other players who are selling vehicles, and it's not a detriment to Tesla because the market that they're in raw numbers keeps growing. So the final thing that I think is huge here, and we have a show coming up on it tomorrow, is what's going on with the new 4680 battery. Because if that allows the vehicle prices to drop into that 25K neighborhood, Tesla enters an unlimited demand zone for its vehicles. And I just think that this sets up for really big news heading into the back end of the year, because I just think they'll end up with huge shortages and customers waiting for their vehicles to come forward rather than choosing competing products. So we wanted to just make this a quick update show today. Number one, just a reminder, make sure you're approved for aftermarket or pre-market trading. That way, if the stock starts to move dramatically, you have an ability to get in on the party, either selling if you have to, if you think it's going to drop significantly, or buying if you think the stock is actually going to rock nicely, and you're seeing that in the follow-through after the numbers have been provided. The one problem I would say to be aware of during this period is what happens with a short squeeze, meaning that, for example, if Tesla jumps 100 points after its announcement, half of those points is likely going to be the fact that, hey, it did well, it legitimately jumps. But the problem is there's a large number of hedge funds or individuals who have sold instruments out there that assume the stock might fall. So all those folks now have to buy shares back, and they have a limited time window to do that. And so they could, in theory, push the stock price beyond what it should have gone given the good news that comes out. So now you're in an interesting position. you bought in, there's a short squeeze, stock price pushes higher, and then all of a sudden, once they've finished getting all the shares they need in the short squeeze, you theoretically could have the stock price start dropping again. And don't forget, we're still waiting for the 3-day rule to hit, because all the market maker analysts are going to do research to determine, well, wait a second, where is Tesla right now? Is it going to severely blow out the numbers going forward or not, and why and how? And all that information will come to the major firms from the analysts they've paid to do so. So once we go through our 3-day period, we start seeing a move from those guys. But I would say don't be surprised on a initial brush, the stock price pushes up and then it pulls back from those high levels before it starts to make a solid run represented by the good numbers that were presented. Or, as we've discussed, it could be for the bad numbers that were presented. At any rate, I wanted to remind you, don't forget, we have some SpaceX shares. We also wanted to encourage you to consider signing up for Patreon for more quality information to aid in your trading and investing. We want to next move on to our health tips. Wanted to encourage you to consider 25 leg lifts a day to strengthen quad muscles, reducing the chance of knee issues. I've been doing a lot of core training. In fact, the next thing I'm going to do is a bunch of core training exercises to help with sort of back pain. Also wanted to encourage you to consider, prior to lovemaking, don't forget, eat a salad, not a large meal. The blood flow to your stomach will now be available for other things in terms of activities. We also wanted to encourage you to consider not going to bed within 4 hours of eating, minimum 2 to let the food digest. Or we also wanted to encourage you to consider no more than once a week fried foods. So we've been getting an opportunity to try out a recommendation from one of our viewers called forest bathing, where you try to spend time in nature for a few hours a day, allowing the peaceful environment to help support your health in all ways, including mental health, by being in that environment. So again, we want to thank you for joining us. Best of luck today as Tesla announced earnings. We'll be back on afterwards to give our impressions of it. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, Lehitro, Hebrew, Choda, Hafez, Farsi, Zdravstvuyte, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, Konbanwa, Japanese, Aheido, Swedish, Good day, our friends in Australia. And in Jamaica, we say, Enough respect, Walk Woodman. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. Bye for now. And let's get Tesla over 800 today.